What is happening in Huliaipole now after the loss of the command and observation post? Why has the situation worsened right now? And most importantly, does the potential fall of Huliaipole pose a real threat to Zaporizhzhia? So today we will take a detailed look at the latest events. We will examine the maps. We will hear the opinions of military personnel and experts. And of course, we will try to understand the enemy's logic. My goal in this episode is not to stir up panic, let me say that right away, but to analyze the situation based on facts. So please subscribe to this YouTube channel, friends, as this episode will not be an easy one. And please share this video with your friends, family, and loved ones. This is very important for the growth of our community. All right, that's it. Let's not waste any time. Let's get started right away. And we'll start with the main point. What do we know about the front line in Huliaipole as of today? So according to experts, the situation is dynamic. It is constantly changing, but there are certain key points. So first, there's the division of the city. Roughly speaking, the city is divided by the Huliaipole River. A significant part of the left bank, that is the eastern part of Huliaipole, is, according to estimates, under enemy control, and this is an important foothold. The second point is the battle for the right bank, because the main street fighting is happening right here. And so, according to the Southern Defense Forces, the enemy is trying to gain a foothold on the main thoroughfares and streets, Bazarna and Heroev Ukraine. They are attempting to advance toward the center. The third point is the infiltration of enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups, SRGs. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups infiltrated the northern districts of the right bank, reaching as far as Shevchenko Street. This is an attempt to expand the zone of control, create a so-called gray zone, and destabilize our defense from within. The fourth point, friends, is the controlled Ukrainian positions. Because our defenders continue to hold the western outskirts of the city, the industrial zone of Huliaipole 150, the positions near the tractor monument, but the city is, in fact, so to speak, divided. So the statements by Gerasimov, by Putin, and in general by the entire Russian propaganda machine about the complete capture of Huliaipole, which Russia announced on the eve of the Zelensky-Trump meeting, are lies, total lies. And of course, it's part of an information campaign. In other words, this is propaganda. It does not correspond to reality. But however, we also can't deny that the situation is serious. A significant part of the city is under enemy fire control. Unfortunately, there are heavy street battles taking place, and in some areas, the initiative, well, of course, the situation changes, but sometimes the initiative is on the enemy's side. How are Russian troops conducting their offensive? According to our defenders, as experts write and as analysts report, the enemy is actually using all available means. Massive assaults, meaning up to 20 attempts per day in certain directions. This indicates in particular the presence of significant manpower reserves, which the enemy notably does not hesitate to use and has no qualms about expending in the war. And by the way, they are transferring reserves, if you pay attention to the words of our military, since yesterday. Just yesterday, there was a statement that the forces, they are deploying reserves and actively transferring them further. This includes artillery, aviation, and so on. There is active use of artillery, drones, kamikaze drones, FPV drones, and there are a lot of KBs flying around. Those KBs destroy about half of everything. In reality, this is a very formidable weapon for suppression and the use of multiple launch rocket systems, as well as the tactics of flanking attacks and encirclement. Yes, that's what they usually use. And so when I was preparing this material, I came across a comment by General Ihor Romanenko. I often do broadcasts with him. He pointed out to my colleagues that the enemy is trying to cut off our logistical routes from the north and south of Huliaipole, thereby isolating our garrison. This is a classic tactic. However, according to the Southern Defense Forces, in just one of the recent days, the enemy lost over 300 of its military degenerates and 61 pieces of equipment in this area alone. So this shows the intensity of the fighting, friends, and the price the enemy pays for every meter. But there is also a tragic side, unfortunately. This must also be mentioned because Deep State was the first to report that Russian bastards executed our 3 Ukrainian prisoners of war further south in Huliaipole. A horrific crime, a savage crime that once again confirms the brutal nature of the occupying army. They fight without any rules, have done so, and will continue to do so. In fact, that's the very essence of the Russian Federation's existence. They have absolutely no regard for anything. They took unarmed people captive and shot them while they were tied up. I hope for a proper assessment from the international community, although in reality there's little point in hoping. Why, in general, did the situation sharply escalate specifically in mid-December? To understand this, we need to look into one key event, namely the one I already covered. Exactly. The loss of the command observation post of the 1st Battalion of the 106th Territorial Defense Brigade. And according to Deep State, and in particular when we refer to the interview with our serviceman who was a participant in those events given to Hromadsky, he commented that the story unfolded as follows. On December 17th to 18th, a Russian assault group, according to various sources numbering from 2 to 3, maybe even more people approached the CP, the command observation post, which was located too close to the front line. Some reports even mentioned a distance of just 700 meters. A battle broke out. The company commander was killed. Then there was panic among us, a disorganized retreat. Instead of an organized counterattack and the destruction of all classified military documents, the personnel were forced to withdraw to the basement and then, not waiting for reinforcements, had to break through to their own lines on their own. For several days, 3 days, as the guys themselves said, they made their way back. Well, you know what the consequences were? First, there are the tactical consequences when the loss of a key command post occurred in that direction. Second, there are operational consequences when we talk about the enemy gaining access, well, probably to classified documents, maps, plans, basically to the command post itself. And this, in many ways, allows them to plan further attacks more precisely. And then there's the moral aspect, absolutely. It must be said that this was a heavy blow to the morale of the units, and it sparked a wave of criticism in society. Well, we're immersed in this ourselves, so we know for sure. And unfortunately, this situation points to systemic problems, underestimating threats in specific directions, mistakes in the placement of headquarters, the fact that we didn't respond in time, issues with command and with coordination. And here, analyst Alexander Kovalenko writes that it's a free-for-all. There was no proper preparation for defense at all, despite the obvious threat since the summer of 2025, that is, this year. And now, as he writes, we are reaping the fruits of these mistakes. Now, friends, the main question, is there a direct threat, Zaporizhzhia? Is there a direct route to Zaporizhzhia? Here, experts' opinions converge on one point. There is no direct and immediate threat. There is no threat of Zaporizhzhia being captured, but a premature threat is, in fact, taking shape. According to Ihor Romanenko, whom I have already mentioned, the situation in the Huliaipole direction is critical, literally because the enemy is trying to create a bridgehead for further advancement. And if they manage to gain a foothold in Huliaipole and take control of the surrounding roads, it will open up opportunities for maneuvers, both to the south, bypassing Pologi, and to the north as well. According to the forecast of Alexander Kovalenko, whom I am referencing, he says that the loss of Huliaipole is only a matter of time, actually, due to mistakes made earlier. He says Huliaipole will not become a second Bakhmut, which held out for months. Its likely loss will open up operational space for the Russian army and, in the long run, bring the front line closer to the city of Zaporizhzhia, making Zaporizhzhia vulnerable to shelling and creating conditions for future offensive operations. And so, according to the commander of the 214th Separate Rifle Battalion, Anton Lavrenyuk, this is his assessment. Look, the enemy is active right now. He has no intention of stopping. Talks about a ceasefire. Forget about it, please, because he is not showing any intention of that whatsoever. And his main goal right now is precisely to create a bridgehead and a breakthrough in the Huliaipole area. So Zaporizhzhia is not threatened by a sudden assault tomorrow or the day after, but the strategic threat is increasing. Unfortunately, with each passing day of fighting for Huliaipole, the city is a shield. As you know, if this shield cracks, defending becomes much, much harder. The guys are titans, like rocks, carrying out operations there, destroying the enemy, and have already wiped out 3 battalions of the Russian Federation. Let me remind you that they are sending in reserves there, but our guys are awesome. They destroy the sabotage groups of those who try to infiltrate. In other words, our professionals are working there, and according to their reports, the results are good for us. But in the end, one way or another, if the enemy is transferring additional forces, then we need them too. So, what conclusions can we draw overall? Huliaipole has not been completely captured, despite what the Russian propagandists are screaming about, but the city is in a state of fierce street fighting. Part of it is under the control, or at least under the fire influence of the enemy. Next, what did this lead to? Yes, the cause of the crisis is a combination of the enemy's tactical audacity, which is real, and the loss of a key command post due to mistakes. And there, Well, as Kovalenko says, we didn't prepare the city for defense even when it was already clear that it needed to be done since the summer of 2025. Then it's a threat. Zaporizhzhia. Once again, there is no direct strategically, after all, it is growing. Unfortunately, walking around is the key to the stability of the entire Zaporizhzhia direction. Here's what you need to understand. Well, Putin's and Gerasimov's statements about victory are just political theater. They're aimed at a domestic audience. And of course, at an attempt to influence international negotiations, the so-called peace talks, and the very meeting of Zelensky's team, which has already taken place. But that doesn't mean the real threat doesn't exist. So, look, our defenders continue to do their job. They do it professionally. They do it wisely. We have to believe in them, trust them, and of course, help them because they're fighting in conditions that are often not of their own making. Their resilience is, in fact, the main factor that is still holding back the enemy. So the Battle of Huliaipole is yet another, friends, difficult lesson of this war. And much depends on how we learn it. At all levels, a great deal depends on this. Thank you for watching this episode to the end. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the armed forces.